Hi there, and welcome. My name is Katie Mead, and I am a registered psychotherapist. And before I even get started, I want to thank Unite for giving me the opportunity to host the session and share this information with you. So thanks very much, and welcome to everybody who has joined. So what I want to talk about today is looking at the journey, let's say, from anxiety through self-support to resilience. So this is a topic that I think could have relevance at any time, really, but especially given the backdrop of what we are all experiencing, namely the COVID-19 pandemic, it seems to have even more relevance today. So there are a few things I want to discuss. First of all, I want to take a look at where we are, what's happening for most of us at this point, where perhaps we've come from, where we think we might be going, looking at some of our responses to what's happening in the world right now, how it's showing up in our lives, that impact, that sort of thing. Taking a look at what anxiety looks like, how it shows up for people, to see whether or not there's relevance or resonance for you. And then take a look at some types of self-support, kind of define that, reframe that in a way to make it relevant, and then show how there is a through line from self-support through to greater resilience that we can use now during these very uncertain times, but also some, sort of best practices as we move forward into an uncertain future. All we know is that it's definitely coming. So that's kind of an arc of what I want to discuss today. And then stay tuned at the end if you're interested. I'm going to do a very, very quick couple minutes, let's say, sort of self-support exercise. I call it a physical inventory. It's just an example of what self-support could look like. It's something that you can do anytime. You can do with me or you can do on your own, but I'll leave that to the end for those of you who might be interested in learning a little bit more about that. All right, so let's get started. So like I said, my name is Katie Mead, and I am a registered psychotherapist. I have done a variety of things in my life, but I'm also a graduate of the Gestalt Institute here in Toronto. That's where I am. I'm in Toronto. And I was drawn to Gestalt psychotherapy in particular. For those of you who know anything about it, I always ask my clients, do you know anything about Gestalt? And it's not a test. Most people don't know what it is, which is fine. It's just it's a modality. It's an approach to psychotherapy that really appeals to me, certainly. So one of the differences, or a few of the differences, let's say, about that. So the entire, my whole speech today, or my whole talk today, is really couched in those terms, sort of within the framework of a Gestalt approach to these things, is that Gestalt is a type of psychotherapy that really focuses on the here and now. Oh, and you'll see my cat Joey in the background. He loves it. So it's based on the here and now. It's also very physical or body focused. So for example, from a Gestalt perspective, we look at our bodies as almost like the front line, let's say, of awareness or understanding. So it's really great for things like anxiety, depression, those sorts of things. For example, anxiety, which is something that we'll focus on a little bit further on, we look at that as a way for our bodies to kind of put our hands up, I guess, and say, listen, there's something wrong. It's kind of a warning system. It sort of tips us off to danger or tips us off to the fact that there is something out of alignment in our lives, something that's not particularly working. So from a Gestalt perspective, we look at that as really useful information, and we deal with anxiety on two levels. So like I said, a very sort of body-focused approach, meaning we look at what the experience of anxiety is and try to mitigate those experiences, right? Sort of manage the manifestation of that anxiety. But then we also kind of look at the underlying reasons, let's say, what is our body? What is your body trying to tell you? And we try to look at it from that perspective. One of the things that I think is important to know about this time right now is that nobody, I don't think, is concerned or confused, rather, about why we're anxious. We are living in times that are unprecedented in terms of levels of anxiety, what people are experiencing. I read a statistic the other day that said they anticipate inquiries for mental health support. They expect it to quadruple over the next few months. And I'm sure this doesn't come as any surprise to anyone. So, I mean, we look around at what the reality for most of us is is right now, especially now as we're all sort of sending our kids back to school, people are going back into the office in some cases. Like I said, there are levels, the levels of anxiety and stress are unprecedented at the moment. And one of the other things that's interesting to note is that through our lives, we will all experience crisis in one way or another. What's unique about this time is that we are all experiencing a crisis, a uniform, in a way, crisis, a common crisis. And that certainly has never happened in my lifetime. So what happens is that we are all individually experiencing the same thing, and yet the way we experience this crisis is quite unique. And I'll go into that a little bit more as I go. The idea behind that really is that although we all approach things from a different way, we respond to anxiety or crisis or stress according to our natures. So another tenet of Gestalt psychotherapy is this idea of coping mechanisms. We actually call them creative adaptations. But the theory there says that as children, especially, there will be situations in which we do not get what we need, whether that's love, support, whatever it is, safety. And so what we do as children is we learn to get these things for ourselves through different ways of coping. So we learn to take from the environment these things that we don't have or we're not receiving from our caregivers. So one of the ideas around that is that sometimes these coping mechanisms, as they are actually very effective. They're very, very useful, right? So we use them throughout our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge can sometimes occur when what happens is that the coping mechanisms we're dealing with become sort of codified or rigid. And it's almost like, we approach a circumstance in the same way every time. So regardless of what the external event is, regardless of what's actually happening, we respond in the same way. So it's a bit like having a toolbox with only one tool. So if all you have is a hammer and you're trying to hammer in a nail, you're golden. But if you're trying to screw in a screw and all you have is a hammer, you can see where I'm going, right? It doesn't work very well. So the Gestalt approach is to look at some of those mechanisms and try to deconstruct them, try to disrupt them in the cycle, right? Because it's typically very cyclical. We end up doing, it's a process. We end up doing the same things in the same way, in the same order. So we try to disrupt that. And what I love, one of the things I love about Gestalt, the approach, is that we look at, as practitioners, we look at mental health, good mental health, as being maximum flexibility. So the idea being that stuff will come at you in your life. We can't control our external circumstances, but with great mental health and great flexibility, we are able to respond in a variety of ways, right? So what we try to do is free people up so that they are able to respond versus react, which then typically lets people feel freer, happier, more content, that sort of thing. So that is sort of the underpinning of all of this. So that brings me back to this sense of anxiety that many of us have, and when I say anxiety, typically when I'm talking to clients about anxiety, they'll say to me something like, yeah, I don't know, that doesn't really speak to me. And I'll say, okay, so, and I think this will actually very much resonate with the travel industry professionals. When you think about your industry and how high pressure, lots of turnover, lots of work, very busy, all of that I think is your reality, right? Every day, lots of demands, shifting priorities, all these sorts of things, right? So you've got to be on your game, you've got to be busy, you've got to be responsive to what's coming at you all the time. So keeping that in mind, let me ask everybody, if I said to you, do you ever experience that sort of restless feeling when you're sitting still and you feel like you've got to get stuff done? There's always something else that you need to get done, or expectations that you hold for yourself that are somewhat unrealistic, doesn't stop you from trying to achieve them. It's hard to sleep sometimes, it's hard to sit still. There's that urgency or that drive that you have to just keep things going, have things accomplished. The idea that even when you do achieve the thing that you want to achieve, you're really only comfortable for a little while until you're up and running again, onto that next thing. If any of those things resonate with you, then you probably are experiencing anxiety, because that's kind of the definition. And just a little side anecdote, I know this because I remember years ago when I'd started this training program, when I went back to school, I was talking to my therapist, and we all had to have our own therapist as we went through the process. Sort of the idea being that how can you help someone else if you've never experienced it yourself? And, you know, she said to me, well, you know about anxiety. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then she said to me what I have just shared with you, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, wow, yeah, that is anxiety. And I had thought that everybody was like that. Not necessarily true. So now that we have sort of a working definition of anxiety, that exists in lots of people's lives, right? There are many of us for whom anxiety is something that's kind of familiar. We've been there, we know what it's like. So in a way, this time of life with COVID and everything else that's happening, in a way, those of us who've experienced anxiety are almost better situated to respond. It's like it's a marathon. COVID-19 and the whole experience and the shakeout and the economic upheaval and all the rest of it is a marathon. And we have been training our whole lives, right? Those of us who've experienced anxiety are kind of like long distance runners. We've been training for this. We're kind of ready for it. And one of the things I just discovered, and I was really surprised by at the beginning of the pandemic, was the number of clients that I have who deal with anxiety who would come to me and say, you know, I'm actually okay, and I'm feeling strange about being okay. Anyway, we have the chops, I guess is the situation. The reality, though, is that for a lot of people, they haven't experienced anxiety on such a high level. And so now, not only do we have our individual experiences of anxiety, we also have a world around us that is experiencing anxiety and stress in an unprecedented way. So whether or not it's the realities of your own life and whatever anxiety-provoking scenarios there are there for you, it's also every time you go outside, every time you go to the grocery store, every time you think about sending your kids back to school, whatever it is, we are now surrounded by anxiety. And so the reality is that it affects all of us all the time. So what do we do? So we've experienced that's what it is. And like I said, for those of us who are driven, who are sort of type A, for all of you in your industry, you know, you've been busy, you've been distracted, possibly, you've been getting stuff done. And early on in the pandemic, when everything just ground to a halt, how many of us were left kind of looking around going, wow, what do I do now, right? It's shocking. And in my practice, I also deal a lot with grief. And you may not be surprised to hear this. Some people have been, some have not, but this experience of things changing so quickly and so profoundly is like a death. It's that same experience, right? So we go into a place of shock. And early on in the pandemic, I did a lot of work with Volunteer Toronto. So it's actually a national, interestingly, volunteer organization here in Canada. And what we did is we put on online seminars, support seminars for frontline workers and volunteer professionals. And I did 2 of those sessions every week for 12 weeks, I think. And what it did is it gave me a really interesting vantage point and view into the sort of the collective experience, how people were dealing with the pandemic, how things were going. And I learned a few really interesting things. So for those of us who are very driven, who had to finally stop and had the rug kind of pulled out from underneath us, and that was most of us, I think a lot of us, at least to a certain extent, there was a period of shock, I think, and you could see it in people, right? Sort of that glazed look, kind of looking around going, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know how to be, right? Structure. We had, I think, all of us to a certain extent understood what structure looked like. There was kind of an expectation around structure that was kind of taken away from us. And then we were left, what do? Do we try to impose our own structure? It's almost like we were jello in a mold, and then they took the mold away, and then, you know, you just kind of subside. And what does that look like, right? And then tied to that, and this is one of the things I mentioned about anxiety, were these very specific expectations that I think a lot of us had. We had expectations around our own productivity, about what kind of parent we needed to be to our children as we tried to balance out work and parenting. How are we now suddenly a teacher? All that kind of stuff. We had expectations about our energy levels even, right? Should we be able to just get up and get on with things, whatever that looked like, because things were so profoundly different. And what I found increasingly is that that was where people started to kind of come undone a little bit, right? Is when they looked at the expectations that they were holding for themselves, they became untenable. And then there was all that stress and anxiety that surrounded that, right? So this is, I think, what I'm trying to do is just sort of give a snapshot, I think, of what a lot of people were experiencing. And then a bit midway through, we then sort of got to that place in the middle. And I think we're approaching another kind of milestone now, where the initial shock kind of wore off, and then we were just kind of in it. And that is a difficult place to be as well. You know, we know that we've come from the past, and that past has, for whatever reason, and well, for lots of reasons, but effectively fallen away. We know that there is a future that will come, and I try to remind myself of this as well as all of my clients. There is a future that will come, and it's not going to look anything like where we are now, but that future hasn't happened yet. So instead, we're in this interim middle place. Again, from a Gestalt perspective, we call it the impasse. You've come so far that you can't go back, but you haven't quite got to where you're going. You haven't arrived yet. So instead, you're in this strange, murky, treading water, stuck kind of place. You know, lots of people have made jokes about that Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day, and how it's like the longest year on record. And I think that we're still there, and that it's starting to sort of kick in a different way now. I think we all knew that this was going to go on for a while, but I'll speak only for myself. I knew that, but I don't think I'd really accepted that this is where we're going to be for quite a while yet. And so back to my comments about grief, this is another kind of stage in that journey, right? So there's a whole lot of stuff all combined, all working together to make this a very, very challenging time. So like I said, that's where we are. That's the reality. What do we do about it, right? So comments about anxiety, I think I mentioned this already before. The idea that anxiety is really useful. It's like a warning system, right? Whether it's assessing danger that's external, that's outside of us, or it's tipping us off to some kind of emotional misalignment or imbalance, it's giving us information that things are not okay, that we are not okay, which then gives us the opportunity to potentially do something about it. So the reality of COVID-19 and what we're experiencing right now and potentially into the near future is that danger, which is very real, right? I mean, we are actually, despite all the protocols and everything, we are living in an environment, all of us, regardless of where you are in the world, where there is an actual danger, right? It's not just, and I don't mean this in any particular way, it's not just emotional, it's an actual physical danger that we're dealing with every single day, right? That's unusual. We're not typically there. And then compounded is the fact that we have all of these other sort of emotional situations, psychological challenges that also cause anxiety, that are also dangerous. And then there are the other sort of practical things. How many of us have lost our jobs? How many of us are worried about losing our job? How many of us are worried about whether our kids are going to be able to learn at school the way it's now being rolled out, and so many other things that you can choose. How many of us are worried about elderly family members or whatever it is? The list sort of goes on and on, right? So we are facing real dangers, tangible dangers, in a way that hasn't been so clear in the past and hasn't perhaps existed in the same way. So my point is that under normal circumstances, I would work with people to identify the source of their anxiety and then try to deal with that. Try to expiate that, try to release it, or whatever it is, right? Do that sort of deep therapeutic work. And yet, in this time, that's not really relevant, right? So we don't actually want to let go of our anxiety, because I think that would be unrealistic. And I don't think that that's at all a realistic expectation, nor would it actually be good for us. We need that anxiety. We need it to protect ourselves, or at least that's the approach, right? But what we don't need is to be crippled by our anxiety. So we're in a situation right now where it's not about getting rid of the anxiety, at least not in the short term, but it is about mitigating the experience of anxiety, freeing us up so that we can move forward, freeing us up so that we can get our jobs done, that we can be good parents or good spouses or good sisters or brothers or whatever it is, right? So that we can live our life, so that we can move forward. And so that we can effectively tread water, if that's what's required, through this strange interim time. So We're not about trying to get rid of the anxiety, and actually normalizing the fact that anxiety exists, and it exists for a reason, especially at this time, is probably one of the most effective approaches that you can take. So we're not about getting rid of the anxiety, but we are about mitigating the experience of anxiety. So again, how do we do that? So I'm going to say to you, it's all about self-support. And I can feel it in my own, like, what does that even mean? What does that mean, right? I mean, I think if I ask people what that means, I get a whole host of responses. Everything from, take a bubble bath to bake banana bread. Remember the banana bread at the beginning of the pandemic? Binge watch Netflix, or, have a glass of wine, or whatever it is, do a workout, that kind of thing. And sure, some of those things, I would say that many of those things, are examples of self-support. But the problem there is that if we ascribe to just a narrow understanding of what self-support is, it's a challenge, because there are certain times in our lives, especially as we're moving day to day, that we just don't have the bandwidth for that. And as soon as self-support moves from something you want to do to something that you think you have to do, so it's sort of the difference between willpower and motivation, it stops being supportive. It stops being helpful. Does that make sense? So if it's something that you feel you need to do, it ceases to be self-support. If it's something that you want to do and it makes you feel better, then that is supportive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point of all of this is that if all of those things, gardening, going for a run, whatever it is, whatever those things are for you, if that is self-supportive, then by all means keep doing it. But I think we can broaden our understanding of what self-support is. Self-support, it's not good or bad, or at least the actual content or the activities are neither good nor bad, but it's everything that you do, all the things that you do to allow yourself to remain present. So for example, for those of us who are, listening to this talk right now, what have you done? What are you continuing to do to make it possible for you to sit in your chair and listen to me talk? It could be something as simple as, noticing the chair that you're sitting on and noticing how you are supported by it. As simple as, did you make a cup of your favorite tea before you came to experience this talk? Small things. It could literally be taking a moment to just breathe. Just a moment, just a breath. Because when it comes to anxiety, I think the reality for many of us, and I'll speak for myself personally, is that when I'm in that anxiety loop, I am either worried about the past that has already happened that I can't change, or I'm worried about the future that hasn't happened yet, over which I also have no agency. And so I'm either in the past or I'm in the future, and I'm not in the present. And if we're talking about relief from anxiety, just a momentary reprieve, even if that's all that's available to us in that moment, then we need to be in the present. And this is where I bring it back to a Gestalt perspective. I told you that it's about sort of a body awareness, right? It's moving from what we observe, what we can feel in our bodies, and then from there moving through to interpretation. It's our approach, it's the way we look at the world and the circumstances in our world and how we have control or not over them. Then to stay in the present, we need to come back to ourselves and come back to our bodies. And so something like breathing works, and you can do it anywhere. You can think about sitting on a chair that's comfortable. You can think about how your shoulders feel. You can think about your posture. You can sort of check in with your breath. You can check in with your legs or your feet. Are they, flat on the ground? Are they supporting you? You can check in with yourself. And one of the, as I said, at the end, I'll do a little exercise, which I did in all of these different sessions previously. And one of the things that we noticed collectively is that if you are focused on something as tangible as your breath, it's almost like our brains are not able to multitask. If I am truly connected and just bringing awareness to what's happening in my body in this moment, I can't think about those other things. And so the result of that, the sort of stopping that hamster wheel of anxiety or whatever, by disrupting that, you give yourself a little peace. You give yourself a little bit of a break. So that's what I mean about self-support. And it's really, really important. And then, you know, there are other examples as well that I wanted to talk about. And I really wanted to focus again, I think it bears restating, this relaxation of expectations, right? We have very specific ideas, I think many of us, about what we need to do, how we need to do it, what it needs to look like, what we should be doing. And a really interesting thing that I have experienced that I know is that every time that word should comes up, every time we feel compelled to do something, that's a pretty good indicator that these are expectations that are coming from outside of us, as opposed to something that is actually our own. So, you know, you talk about structure. This is another way that we can provide some self-support, right? We can provide some support for ourselves, is this concept of structure. And the idea is to, especially in this time, is to create a little bit of structure around yourself, around your world, around your environment, around your life, whatever it is, but to make sure to allow for that structure to be dynamic so that you can move and change and adjust while the world around you moves, changes, and adjusts, right? So all of these things that I'm talking about are things that we can use, they're tools that we can use, let's say, to sort of create and provide that structure, that ground, that support, that self-support that allows us to take a break, to take a breath, to take a pause, and really have a bit of relief from that anxiety, right? Because it's the anxiety that's exhausting. It's the anxiety that gets in the way of everything that we're trying to do. So back to my marathon example, you know, I don't know if any of you are runners, I am. It's really, really hard to set your pace if you don't know how long the race is. And right now, we know we're in the race, but we don't know how long we're going to go for, right? So anything that you can do, anything that we can do to take some of that power back and to, you know, release some of that anxiety, brings back some of the resources. We need to marshal our resources. We don't know how long this race is going to be. And so we need to be as wise, we need to husband our resources as much as we can. And to relax that anxiety, to free yourself from some of the experiences of anxiety is a really great way to do that. And so my whole point is that if we can take this experience that we're having collectively, and we're experiencing it in our own ways, obviously, if we can take that and through that experience, collective experience of anxiety, learn about self-support, practice good self-support, we can then move into resilience. And that's kind of the end game, right? It's not about things going back to normal, whatever that means, because we know that things are going to be different. We don't know what those things are going to be, and we don't know how they're going to look. But if we can foster resilience in ourselves, and this experience is actually, in a way, bear with me, an opportunity for us to learn those skills and to really practice those skills, then we can turn that into resilience, which we can then take with us throughout the rest of our lives. Let's hope we are never, any of us, in this situation again. But it's pretty sure, I think it's pretty certain, that we will all experience crisis again in some way, hopefully minor, but it will happen again in our lives, right? So we can use the tools and the experiences and the lessons that we're learning now as we gain this sense of resilience to approach whatever comes at us as we move forward. And that's the point. So what is resilience? Resilience is the ability to be flexible, right? That goes back to our sense of expectation, to look at what we want to do, to look at what we used to do and kind of go, all right, I'm going to adjust to what is actually happening in my life. I'm going to put aside those expectations and just be where I am, right? So flexibility, that's a huge one. The ability to make a plan, right? And this, I think we could go back to the idea of structure. You can make a plan for your life. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what it's going to look like. And we don't even know how long it's going to be till we get there. But that doesn't stop us from making a plan. The only caveat in terms of making that plan is, again, to make sure that it's dynamic. So you have a framework that looks great. And then when things change, you adjust. You adjust to what's actually happening, right? So flexibility, and having a plan. Having a plan gives us a sense of autonomy, gives us a sense of control over the uncontrollable, which generally makes us feel better, right? The ability to learn from the experiences that we've had, to be able to look back and fairly dispassionately look at what has happened, look at what has come before and go, okay, I learned from that, and then incorporate that new information into our approach moving forward. That is also resilience, right? And then the biggest one that I haven't even talked about yet, I like to leave it for the end, and especially given the audience that I think I'm speaking to, the connectedness of your industry. I mean, hopefully all industries, but I think especially the travel industry is so connected, the networking that's possible, is reliance on community. And I think that COVID-19 has allowed us to look at our concepts of community and perhaps reframe them or reimagine them, right? I mean, through this, I don't know who I'm talking to, lots of you. I'm so happy to be able to do this. I'm doing it from my house. I'm doing it from my home office, you know? So my ability to reach out and connect with people, I think, is greater now. I'm not suggesting in any way that we discard the in-person, of course not, but I'm saying add to our concept of what community is and stay connected. That connection to community, that connection to other people, your tribe, whatever it is, this is a huge factor in terms of developing good resilience, right? So all of these things are available to us if we can stay focused on them. And like I said, in a way, this bizarre experience that we are all sharing, and I mean, everybody says it, we're all in it together, and we are, right? But this shared experience, I think, has given us the opportunity to learn to connect in different ways. So not only do we have the opportunity to learn about ourselves and learn what works, to reimagine our own lives, to sort of discard the things that weren't working before and really focus on the stuff that's important to us moving forward. It also gives us the opportunity to really develop and strengthen and nurture relationships in a different way, and to really build and connect through community. So these are my thoughts. This is my advice. This is my assessment, I think, of where we are. I think it's an opportunity. Of course, it's difficult. It is. It's challenging. All of that is true. But like I said, there will be a future. It is coming. And we are getting ourselves ready to meet that future in the most successful way possible. So thank you so much for listening. I'm sure my contact information is there. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have. Feel free to reach out. Enjoy the rest of the conference. What an amazing idea. And again, thank you so much to Unite for putting this together. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to spend this time with you. Thank you very much. And stand by for the exercise. Thank you. Okay. So, as I promised, this is just a couple minutes, an exercise. I call it a physical inventory. It speaks to my discussion around self-support, coming back to center, being present in the moment as a way to mitigate the experience of anxiety. So I'm going to take us through this guided physical inventory. Close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, if that makes you more comfortable. You can turn your camera off, whatever it is, and just listen to me and try to focus on my voice, but also focus on your awareness of what is happening in your own body, okay? So take a breath and start at the top of your head. Can you feel a sense of energy starting at the crown of your head and working its way down? Check in with your eyes. Is there pressure behind your eyes? Is there tension? Move down into your jaw. That's where a lot of us hold our tension, is in our jaw. What can you feel? And as you move further down, be aware of your neck. Be aware of your spine, how you're sitting. Are you sitting straight? Is your posture good? Are you holding tension there? And then as you move further down into your shoulders, just notice your shoulders and notice if you're holding tension. Is there a tightening? Do they feel heavy? Just check in with how you feel. And as you continue further down, check in with your breath. How is your breath? Is it held? Is your breathing shallow? Do you feel supported? Did you notice your breathing? And then as you move further down into your stomach, another place where so many of us hold our tension. How are you feeling? Take a breath. Are you holding your stomach? Do you feel relaxed? Is there clenching? Is there roiling? Do you feel good? What do you notice? And then continue down into your legs. How are you sitting? What kind of chair are you sitting on? Are your legs crossed? Are you sitting comfortably? And then continue down into your feet. Again, how are your feet? Are they crossed? Are they flat on the floor? Can you feel this energy moving down through your body, through your feet, into the ground? Can you feel yourself tethered to the ground, rooted there? And breathe. And now I want you to envision reversing the direction of that energy. So you're actually drawing the energy from the ground, through your feet, up into your legs. Can you feel that? Can you feel the energy keeping you tethered in place, in time, in this present moment? And can you feel that energy moving up again through your stomach, through your chest? Take a breath. And then feel some of that energy moving through your arms and out through your hands. Can you feel that energy being released? Are your hands warm? Are they tingly? Just notice what's happening there. And then continue this journey, this energetic journey, up through your throat, again, your jaw, behind your eyes, up through the top of your head. And feel that energy. You've drawn all of it up through your body, taking all of your tension, all of your stress, up through the top of your head, and just release it. Just envision that energy leaving, letting it go. And all of your tension is going with it. And just breathe here for a moment. And as you're breathing, pay attention to the room that you're in. What's the temperature? Is there a breeze? Is it comfortable? Can you hear anything? Can you hear people outside? Are there other people around? And breathe. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. And there you go. Just a couple of minutes as a way to ground us, to stay present, and to relieve that anxiety. I hope that helped. Thank you so much.